Okay.
Because I'm gonna do Haiti eventually.
Yeah, you get around to it. It's one of those things where it was a year from, or exactly a year from Mogadishu, and man, the same guys were here we are in Haiti doing what we thought was going to be the same kind of thing, and it didn't turn out that way, thankfully.
Turned out completely different.
Yeah. But anyway, yeah.
So a number of guys have told me. So.
Yeah.
Oh, we ready? We're up?
I've been taping.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. All right, this is Doug Cubison. I'm the command historian with the 10th Mountain Division. And I'm sitting here in Denver, Colorado with Major Chris Chandler. And what we're going to talk about today is Major Chandler's experiences as a medical platoon leader with 214 Infantry, the Golden Dragons in Somalia. And Chris, well, we'll start off. I understand that you're kind of a legacy of the division here.
Yeah, there's a organization within the 10th Mountain Division Association called the Rucksack Society, which essentially recognizes veterans and their second generation 10th Mountain Division descendants. So active World War II veterans, and then active duty 10th Light guys that or gals that are serving in the 10th Mountain Division. The first inductee into the Rucksack Society was General Burnett, who is the former division commander. The second one was my father, and the third one was me. Wow. So my father and I, to the best of our knowledge, are the only father and son combat veterans from the 10th Mountain Division.
Fantastic.
So.
And who did your dad serve with?
My dad was with K Company 87th. He was a K-87th guy, and actually he, in actual fact, served in all of the regiments as a cadre guy when the division was standing up at Camp Hale, and was one of the original 1st Battalion, 1st Mountain Infantry Battalion guys at Paradise Lodge up at Mount Rainier. Wow. So he stood the unit up, went to Kiska, did the whole 87th Regiment thing, and yeah, he truly was one of the charter members of the organization.
Wow, that's fantastic. Okay, so when did you join the 10th Mountain Division?
I actually joined the 10th officially, technically, when I left. I enlisted in 1983. I went and served with 1st Ranger Battalion as a combat medic, and then again with some mechanized infantry units. When I left the active duty and went to the National Guard while I was going to college, I joined the 10th Mountain Division, and I didn't even know it at the time. And I joined the local infantry unit in Syracuse, New York, which is where we're from. And lo and behold, they had just made this agreement with roundout brigades, and it was the roundout brigade for the 10th Mountain Division. And when I went home and showed my dad what patch I was sewing on my uniform, he couldn't believe it. We all couldn't believe it. And so I was a squad leader, an infantry squad leader, for 4 years in the National Guard with the 10th Mountain Division. I got commissioned, and then went to Fort Drum as a Medical Service Corps officer. I chose to go into the Medical Service Corps. It was a fine line between being a Medical Service Corps officer or an infantry officer, because my heart has always been in the infantry, and but I really loved being a medic, and I wanted to be a medical platoon leader, and boy, I really thought I'd be great. It would be a great thing to be a medical platoon leader in an infantry battalion in the 10th Mountain Division, and that's exactly what happened. So
when did you join 214?
I got to 214 in 1991, October of 1991. And it was a great, the medical platoon leader that was there. I don't know how I got assigned to 214. There was already a medical platoon leader there, and he was in Ranger School. He came back. They offered him another job, and they kept me, which turned out to be wonderful for all of us.
Now 214 was a cohort battalion. Was the medical platoon also cohort?
In part, the Fort Benning and Fort Sam Houston are not lined up in that way directly. The recruit cycles are just a little bit different, and so I would say yes, because we would get combat medics in it seemed at the same time or on or about the same time that large waves of cohort guys would come from Fort Benning, but it didn't match up exactly. So yeah, the Army Medical Department, in terms of its acquisition, training, and then filling requirements out in combat divisions, is not, and was not, and is not now, to the best of my knowledge, quite on cycle with a cohort combat unit. It's close. It's about as close as they can make it, because the training is different. It's just they assess them differently, and the training requirements are different, so they arrive just a little bit off cycle. So.
Now, when did you kind of get news that your battalion was going to deploy to Somalia?
Right. We had. Let's see. We had gone to Guantanamo Bay on an assignment and then returned. We essentially were providing security for Haitian migrants that were rioting, and the citizens of Gitmo were getting nervous. So we went down there. That was a first deployment of sorts. It certainly wasn't a combat deployment. We then went to we got a new battalion commander. Let me back up. We got a battalion commander just before we went to Guantanamo Bay, and this is my 4th month in the battalion, and that was a frocked major at the time, Colonel Bill David. And Bill David was a superstar in the eyes of the combat arms. I mean, he really was. He was recognized as an up-and-comer and future general officer, and he was a super hard charger. And we started immediately training at a level that we were already training hard, and we didn't know how hard it was going to get. He ratcheted up significantly, and he had very simple philosophies on things, and just as we were getting cranking up, we went to Guantanamo Bay, or part of the battalion went to Guantanamo Bay, and at that point he kind of fettered out and figured out what was going on in the battalion while he was PTing everybody's rear ends right off. When we returned from Guantanamo Bay, we entered a training cycle that was pretty tough. A lot of crawl, walk, run, a lot of live fires, particularly. That was the holy grail. That was the brass ring that was out there. Train hard to a point where I'm going to allow you to do live fires, and when I do, it's going to be, when we get to the live fire phase, it's going to be significant, and it'll change your life. And he was very serious about it, making it as realistic as possible. He was willing to take risks where other commanders were being trained at that time on being risk adverse. So he truly was different, and I'm sure that was not easy on him. I'm sure he got a lot of resistance. In fact, when I was on division or on battalion staff, I felt a little bit of that. We were in the middle of our second. We were kind of in the middle of a year-long training process when we got deployment orders to go to Hurricane Andrew. We went and did that mission, and then came back and started ramping up for a bunch of live fires. We did a off-post deployment to Camp Pickett, or Fort Pickett. Fort Pickett was in Virginia. It was a great place. Get us away from the flagpole. Let us concentrate on battalion training without a lot of distractors. And it's a place that we had the battalion had been to before earlier, and so we really wanted to use it. Just as we were packing up to go to Camp Pickett to go into platoon and company sticks lanes, the division got alerted about Somalia. Somalia started popping up on the news. It was on CNN, and then the national interest in that mission elevated, and that coincided with the presidential election in 1992.
Right.
So when we were driving down to Camp Pickett, buses and the whole 9 yards, and packed up, we stopped at an exit in Cicero, New York. Pulled off, and the whole battalion pulled off, and everybody grabbed a cheeseburger or whatever, and as we're piling back on, I'm standing there on the front of one of the buses, and Colonel David comes up to me and says, "Are you ready to go to Somalia?" And I said, "Yeah, sir, we're not going to Somalia." Colonel David, Again, I always continually underestimated Colonel David. And sure enough, we got down to Camp Pickett, and we were there for 3 days and got recalled back to start packing up. Our battalion was the DRF-1 battalion for the division, meaning we were first in the hopper. We were ready to go. Stuff was packed and ready to go. It was AHA'd, or sitting over in an alert holding area, completely JI'd by the Air Force and ready to get loaded up and ready to go. And we were the lead battalion of the DRF-1 Brigade for 18th Airborne Corps, 2nd Brigade, 10th Mountain Division. And 2nd Brigade got the call, you're going to go to Somalia. But for whatever reason, and I still don't know why, don't ask me, you're going to have to investigate somewhere else. 214 did not get the call. It stayed back. Even though we were the DRF-1 battalion and the most ready battalion in the brigade, for whatever reason we were held back. I'm sure there's a reason why. Colonel Kip Ward, now General Ward, 4-star General Ward, was our brigade commander at the time, and took the rest of the brigade to Kismayu, Somalia.
Southern Somalia.
Southern Somalia, right. And we were plugged in. We were absolutely ready to go, bags packed, and when Colonel David said, go on Christmas leave, and we all were glued to the television set while on Christmas leave. We went to Panama. We trained. While we were in Panama, it snowed so much that the wives almost went into a revolt because we weren't there to shovel the snow, and the poor rear detachment commander, he just, anyway, I don't ever want that job. As the months rolled on and we started to talk about the redeployment of 2nd Brigade, we started to get the notion that we would replace, we started to get the idea, and it's essentially informal warning order, hey, stand by, you guys may have to go and replace the QRF. We did the task force structure in Mogadishu was built on, it started to essentially take on the form of a coalition force, a UN coalition force. UNISOM 1, UNISOM 2, essentially that transition was made, and the task organization inside Mogadishu essentially meant that a reinforced battalion, meaning a battalion plus other stuff, including aviation assets, would remain in Mogadishu to provide quick reaction force coverage for the UNISOM 2 coalition, UN coalition. That unit that stayed in Mogadishu to provide that service was 122 Infantry. In June, maybe you know better, but I think in June is when we got the video feed from 122's raid on Abdi's garage, right. And we knew that the worm had turned in Somalia. Once we saw those TOW missiles going in that building, everybody there watching it knew that things were going to be different. And it was right on the heels of that where it was, hey, indeed, 214, you're going to replace, 122 in theater. And we were ready to go anyway. I mean, so we essentially just built did final planning for the next month and a half. When we got to Mogadishu in late July, early August, we kind of trickled in. Okay. Late July, early August. 122 was awfully happy to leave. Boy, they just like every redeploying unit, hey, we're ready to go. And one of the things that Colonel David did immediately was to start to get everybody, flip the switch in everybody's head. And we did that by going on combat operations right away. One thing that we did, as soon as we acclimated, we stood everybody down, we got 1 day of rest, we super hydrated ourselves, and we started doing combat operations immediately. Our first real combat operation was essentially right after we stood up as the bona fide QRF, was a reaction to an MP ambush. Which which is a little bit of a story. When I got off the plane in Mogadishu and we drove through the MSR to our base at the UN, the old Mogadishu U.S. University and U.S. Embassy complex. It was kind of, they were together. When we drove up through that, we drove through the middle of the city. It was absolutely the most unsecure MSR I had ever even imagined. So it made me nervous, personally. And I was a brand new first lieutenant. But I had a good working relationship with my S3, who was Mike Ellerby, who was an absolute warrior extraordinaire. And he was very approachable. And I approached him and I said, we ought to move the MSR. I don't know where, let's look at the map. And we started going into a battalion staff process whereby we would move the MSR. And we proposed moving it. Really, the only option was to move it out and around the western side of the city, all the way out into the desert, and connect a couple of road networks that went down past an old tower and refinery network and to the southern road that ran along the coast and back to the airfield, essentially the extreme southern Mogadishu, and then to the airfield. We pitched it, we staffed it, we pitched it to hire. And that was a no-go. We're not going to do it. On the, I want to say it was the 8th of August. I think it was the 8th of August, 1993, we stood up our ready company, who was out the door in 30 seconds, and reacted to a call to secure an area where MPs had been blown up. An MP convoy had been ambushed. Mm-hmm. It was my first experience with what we now call IEDs. And when we got to the scene, it was a remnants of a Humvee. It was all that was left. The convoy had essentially fought their way back and out, but we had essentially, the objective was to secure the area and try to find out what had happened to see if we could find the culprits. When I got there, there were still body parts and pieces that had to get cleaned up, so we did. We policed them up and returned them to the graves registration guys. But it was extraordinary. It was a very powerful explosion. Most of the Humvee parts were up on top of buildings. I saw human remains as far away as 50 yards splattered up against, buildings. And Colonel David, essentially, we caught a little bit of fire. We exchanged a little bit of fire there, but there really wasn't much. Our after actions review was held in a battalion conference room on the U.S. University compound, and Colonel David made it that was his big flip switching speech. Mm-hmm. And he asked, one of the things he did to help was to ask me, stand up and tell everybody what you saw. And it was the piece of a femur and true brain matter that was just so far away from the detonation site. It really just was incredible to try to imagine. It was incredible that I didn't hear the explosion, given the fact that it really wasn't that far from where we were at. But it was Mogadishu, and there was explosions kind of all the time, and so you, after a while, just kind of ignored them. And one of the things that we experienced right away was essentially nightly mortar attacks, to the point where it just got to be fairly routine. Most of that was either mortar fire that was actual true mortars, or it was RPG fire that was just, hey, look, the embassy is a big target. You don't have to be a very good shot with an RPG.
Kind of harassing fire.
It was absolutely, and there were many times where I would be standing out and I'd see an RPG just kind of sail over the wire and it would land. Usually, not harming anyone. Let's see. Let's say that was the 8th of August. The 13th of August. No, 13th of August. I'm trying to remember here. Yeah, that was the 8th of August. The next combat operation we did was very soon after. I want to say it was the 13th, but I'm probably wrong. I'd have to check the check the log, but we got a little G2 on where the culprits of that MP ambush were at, and it was in an area northeast of the Mogadishu airport. I could show you on a map, but I can't remember what it's called. Okay. And it was a complex of it's kind of where just essentially south of where K4 Circle was. Okay. K4 Circle is being that landmark that everybody knows. Everybody that knows Mogadishu knows that landmark. But south of there, and we essentially captured, I don't know, it must have been 6 to 8 Somali nationals that in the end, I don't think all of them were associated with it, but we did catch some that were. Okay. So we stripped those guys, threw them in the back of the truck, and then essentially turned them over to the UN for what it was worth. After that, we did some cordon and search missions in the vicinity of Digfur Hospital. Now, there was a couple of hospitals on the south and east side of the embassy complex. And when I say hospitals, that's a very loose term. Some places it was just a place for people who got wounded to die. Sometimes it was just, essentially put a red cross on a building and it's a hospital. If there happens to be some wounded people in there, then yeah, okay, I guess it's a hospital. But those hospitals also seem to be owned by the militia. Intel coming in constantly confirmed that, not to mention our own combat operations, whereby it was, we would get fire from areas in and around the hospital. On the 13th of September, we conducted a search and attack mission on Digfur Hospital, whereby we didn't even get to the hospital before our Bravo company got just pinned down with some pretty terrific fire. That hospital was essentially right out the back gate of the U.S. Embassy. You know, you go down the street and you hang a left, and you don't have to go very, very far, and you start hitting that complex. There were a handful of complexes, and including that hospital, that were just bad. They were bad. They were full of, they were malicious strongholds for sure. There was probably weapons caches in there that would have blown our minds. And we were adding to a very large collection of weapons caches with all of these cordon and search missions that we were doing. Kept in a mill van, and it was quite an arsenal. It was like a little museum, because it was just weapon systems of every type that you find in that part of the world, including bows and arrows, and just everything from bows and arrows to standard AK-47s to U.S. stuff to Czech stuff, Chinese stuff. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. So, on the 13th of September, 1993, 214, 2 companies plus, it was Charlie Company, Bravo Company in the lead, doing an attack to CLIR, got pinned down, there was no way. We were funneled, we were channelized on that road, and in essentially what it did is it confirmed our suspicions. Indeed, that's a stronghold. Right. And in our retrograde, as we were breaking contact down that road, it took a couple of hours, literally, to pull back inside the embassy compound. An attempt, we were catching some casualties. One in particular, a kid from Bravo Company, I still remember his name was Deaver. Deaver got hit, standard AK-47, went in, tumbled, and embedded in the backside of his, his flak vest in those days, where it wasn't body armor of any kind. It was the old, Vietnam era stuff, right? And Deaver got essentially hit through the liver, and liver's a very vascular organ, and it was bleeding, and he was bleeding a lot. So it was serious. But to send an ambulance along the road with essentially nothing but the back of the embassy wall as a backdrop we got shot to pieces. We attempted to blow a hole in the wall of the embassy. Now, the embassy at that time, as embassies almost always are, were secured by Marines. The Marines were helping us out with a little bit of fire from the top of the embassy. But the Marines really weren't keen on us blowing a hole in their wall. and they really weren't keen on me and my ambulance coming in there. The intent was to blow a hole in the wall, pull Deaver through, load him in my ambulance, and zip him over to the hospital. Hospital being on the embassy compound. And I rolled through the gate, and a young Marine, being the Marine that he is, a good kid, you know, sir, I can't let you through, sir, I can't let you through. And I'm like, you're going to have to shoot me because I'm going through. So shoot me or let me through. And he let me through. And I had a little argument with his lieutenant, but we got it all figured out. Our engineers from 41st Engineer Battalion in those days tried to put a little shape charge on that wall, and it did nothing but make dust. So that wasn't going to work. Good idea, but those are some serious walls. And good, because boy, we really like those nice walls around us. But in this case, it didn't work. So we didn't really have a choice but to send the ambulance out, and we did. Out went the ambulance, down the road, picked up Deaver, came back with a lot of bullet holes, and a very wide-eyed PA in the back, Mike Flaherty, who you might know. And Deaver survived. And a couple other wounded, but nothing too significant, although actions on the part of one of my medics popping up back and forth across the road under fire several times. Essentially, he got one of the first Valor Awards from our actions in Mogadishu. He's a good kid, great kid. His name was Trong, and he was on a 2-year enlistment. He was from Oregon. He was on a 2-year enlistment, and boy, he was one of my favorites. Real super smart kid, and Bravo Company was pretty lucky to have him that day. But so after that, yep, got it. Digfur Hospital, you know, yeah, got it. Enemy stronghold. What are we going to do now? Course of action 2, we're going to take down this enemy stronghold. It was actually, if I remember correctly, I've had to look at a map to refresh myself, but there was a complex, a building complex that was just to the north of Digfur Hospital that we thought was indeed the big money target, the big objective. We planned a mission to attack and clear that thing. And at that point, all of our missions were being approved by the National Command Authority. Now, we were technically working for the UN, but General Montgomery, being the UN U.S. UN commander on the ground, had a direct line into, we were not approved. We didn't get our marching orders from the UN when it came to combat operations. We had a responsibility to take care of them, and we did. But when it came to active combat on our own, to go out and get, weapons, militia members, Adid, whoever, we had to get National Command Authority from the United States to proceed. It was on or about that time when Task Force Ranger ended up deploying. So when we were executing our 13 September missions, we knew they were coming by, and they sent an LNO over to us, and he was on the ground with us, I think, on 13 September. His name was Nixon, Major Nixon, and he was right next to me, right next to my hooch. I used to see him in the morning and say hi to him, but essentially he just kind of kept tabs with what 214 was doing and what Task Force Ranger was going to do, and what sharing intel. The intel sharing, I used to see Task Force Ranger guys coming over to our CP all the time. We'd talk with them, we'd sit them down, they'd attend our our nightly briefings and stuff like that. It gave the appearance that things were being coordinated. We did not get approval to execute that mission on that attack to clear mission, and I was not disappointed, because we were anticipating a lot of casualties, and it was, everybody had a lump in their throat about that mission, but it had to be essentially, with lack of another combat force, Task Force Ranger just getting up and running, it was really, look, we're either going to do this or why are we here? If we're not here to do this, it's an infantry battalion.
Right.
Then that's why we should be here. So we were all kitted up and ready to go, and looking at our clocks to get the approval to execute this mission, and it was stand down. There's a few guys that I'll refer you to a couple of guys that definitely know what I'm talking about. I was just talking with a guy that I was another lieutenant at the time, and he still feels the same way. He was like very thankful that we never got to go ahead to do that mission. On the 25th of September, a 10th Mountain Aviation Brigade Black Hawk was shot down.
Right.
In the vicinity of Newport, just north of Newport, I think, northeast. So not too far from the airfield. Our ready company was Charlie Company 214, and Charlie Company zipped on down there to essentially secure that that downed helicopter. It was kind of an eerie precedent for things to come just a little while later. Charlie Company ended up getting into a firefight there for about, I want to say it was about 4 or 5 hours. I was not on that QRF mission, but one of my senior medics was, and essentially ran the aid station, the on-site aid station.
The two pilots were pretty badly burned.
Yeah, they were. They were badly burned. We also had a couple of kids we were augmented. 214 was augmented by a platoon from Charlie Company 187. We also had an anti-tank platoon, and we outfitted one other platoon with Humvees. In the fashion of Iraq today.
Right.
Up-mounted patrol vehicles with crew-served weapons that were, as best as we could in those days, armored. We sent, which essentially meant 996s, hardshell 996s with a few sandbags in them. That was it. When Task Force Rangers showed up with their true up armor Humvees, we were drooling, But two of our soldiers were seriously injured, and both of those guys were turret gunners. One shot in the neck, and the other one shot, I can't remember where the other kid was shot. But one, his name was Gutierrez, was shot in the neck. And I actually never found out whatever happened to him. He was evac'd, and I never heard about him again. I inquired, but I never did hear about him. And I really should go find that kid and find out how he fared, because he was not well when he got on the plane.
I know he survived. He's not on the list of KIAs.
He's not. Yeah, he's not a KIA. Just kind of wondering how he's getting around. But so that was that mission.
And then I guess, let's go ahead and get to 3 October.
3 October. That goes right into, which leads right into the 3rd of October.
Right, so
Sunday, the 3rd of October, 1993. 4 days before then, 214 was up and ready and sitting outside the embassy gate in direct support of Task Force Ranger, doing a cordon and search, essentially a snatch mission. And 214 was ready to go in support, listening on the radio. Done at night, fast roped in, grabbed a bunch of NGOs, as it turned out, and evac'd them back to the embassy. Wrong target. Happens all the time. Got it. But we were in on it. The whole battalion was sitting, parked in a line, ready to go out the door, locked and loaded. Just waiting for the call to, proceed, reinforce, come here, provide reinforcing fire, whatever the case may be, whatever the situation ran into. On the 3rd of October, a Sunday, mission was executed, and everybody knows what it is because it's been publicized to the nines.
Right.
But we were not called to provide reinforcing support. That, to me, says it all about the mission. Nobody ever wants to address that. Nobody ever.
I understand that from other folks in 214 told me they had no idea
We didn't know they were conducting a mission. We did not know.
The only warning the only notice they got was when airspace was closed above them, and the 3 shop got notification that the airspace above
Correct.
the raid was closed, and that was the first
That's correct.
notice that.
The idea that they were conducting mission, right. And actually, that kind of closing airspace so they would conduct mission is not something you would distribute down to our ready company. It would just be one of those things that the battle captain would go and then maybe notify the battalion commander. And then after that, who else would you notify? Task Force Rangers conducting a mission. Okay, noted. Got it. Our ready company was ready to go all the time anyway, so it really wasn't any, no reason to notify them. They're ready to go. When the first helicopter got shot down, I heard it. We found their frequency and turned it on, and we heard the radio traffic. When that helicopter went down, I was standing right there in the TOC, and Colonel David said, I believe, let me see who was up. Alpha was out training. I believe it was Charlie Company. Get Charlie Company up and ready. And they were essentially loaded on the vehicles in 30 seconds and ready to go out the gate. When the second helicopter went down, Colonel David took matters into his own hands, contacted the Joint Task Force and said, hey, I've got 2 companies ready to go. You want me to push forward? Yeah, Bill, go. And 2 companies went out the gate, down to K4 Circle, and took a left. By the time the second helicopter had gone down, there was so much militia activity in that area that there was no way that those 2 companies were going to make it. I was on one of those trucks. We ended up taking that left down towards essentially between what a U.S. base called Sword, I believe, Sword Base, and K4 Circle. There was a road, straight road, ran right into the Bakara Market area, or the Black Sea area of, right. I don't know why it's called that, but the Black Sea area of northern Mogadishu. There was no way we were going to make it up there. We would have had a situation on our hands that was equally as bad or desperate as what Task Force Ranger had themselves into. And, oh, by the way, at the same time, we also saw a smoking convoy of Task Force Ranger vehicles headed our way, and we had to get out of the way, and they took a left and essentially went around us. So there really was no coordinated effort at that point. When we had our own firefight going on there to try to turn the vehicles around and try another way in. Go down to maybe, we weren't going to make it in that way. Maybe we need to go down a little further and try another way. At that point, Colonel David started talking, our TAC started talking with the Joint Task Force. And I believe it was at that time when General Garrison said, I need you here, bring your force to the airfield, and we will do a coordinated effort. Together we will go in and figure out the best plan of attack to get in there.
That was the main airfield there.
Exactly. Alpha Company was recalled from their training. They were out in the desert doing a little bit of mount training. And the battalion descended on the airfield, whereby we were task organized very quickly, and 2 companies pushed forward to a staging area not too far from where that helicopter was shot down on 25 September at a place called Newport.
That was the Newport area.
Newport, right. And it was a combination of Task Force Ranger guys, which included Delta and was it Bravo Company 375? Charlie Company 3rd to 75th, whoever was left from Task Force.
Just one platoon, but
they
had like one platoon
right.
That was kind of a scratch force that they threw together.
Right.
They threw some other guys. Whoever was lying around, they kind of grabbed.
Right.
I think that this was when they had cooks and everything else.
Yeah, right. Whereby every Ranger look. The deal here is, and this is a point that I always wanted to make. As a former Ranger, medic, we had a bunch of ex-Rangers in our ranks, a lot of them. A lot of guys that, not just the tab wearers, the guys that had served in the regiment. Mm-hmm. And we got it. We get it. We really do. We get it. but we're all on the same team here, and so let's all just get it done. You know what I mean? So the us and them things start. I mean, that maybe even not even worth talking about. But point is, the combat force on the ground was Alpha Company and Charlie Company, 214 infantry, plus whatever Task Force Ranger had scratched together, the cooks, and everybody else that was left on convoys that had made it back.
And this is where you linked up with the Malaysians and Pakistanis.
Exactly. Here's what had to happen. Needed some armor to go in. Malaysians provided APCs. Alpha Company and Charlie Company piled onto these APCs.
You'd never done mechanized or APC work before. You maybe
Not
personally had,
me personally, but not the never.
So
No.
I understand you even had to give guys instruction like how to open doors.
We didn't even know how to We didn't know how to open the doors. Language barrier. What the mission was, commitment to the mission, all of that stuff was disparate. The Malaysians were on a different page, the Pakistanis were on a different page, and we clearly were on a different page from them. And any small, communication requirements on the ground were exceedingly difficult. But it was time to go, and we were going to make it happen through, brute force. And will. And so off we go north on that road that goes right up towards the stadium that was the Pakistanis controlled. Took a left on 21 October Road that essentially goes straight into the Black Sea area, Bakar Market area, and made that left turn, and then it just opened up. APCs were blown up. Constant fire. I have not seen the movie, but people tell me it's exceedingly graphic. The bottom line was the rules of engagement were turned on. If you weren't wearing an American uniform or weren't in a Malaysian APC or a Pakistani tank, you were going to get shot. Didn't matter if you were a woman, child, or anything else, but because if you were on the street, you were involved in this. Mm-hmm. And so that's really what we found ourselves in. Now, we fought our whole piece in the dark. We didn't have that, we were in the dark the whole time. Right. The whole piece was fought at night. We had one of my buddies, Mark Hollis, his entire APC was toast. The Malaysian was killed. And he was essentially separated from Alpha Company for a good part of the night. I don't know if you've interviewed Mark Hollis.
I understand. The PPCs he was with actually took a wrong turn.
That is correct.
He couldn't get them
to turn around.
Yes. So he ended up with like 3 APCs and most of his platoon going several blocks to the south of where everybody else got separated. And then, he got a couple of his APCs hit. Right. Had to dismount and really got pinned down.
The way he told it to me was, there was a break in contact in the convoy a little bit. The driver did not know that everyone before him had gone over this small obstacle. He assumed that this burning tire and garbage pile, they had taken a left, and he just made that assumption. And he ended up taking a left, and he was on this tiny street. I ended up looking at some photos later, and they just got pummeled. It was RPG fire. It was just hellacious. Pulled them out, and they essentially holed up for a good portion of the night until they could make radio contact again. But Alpha Company, Captain Drew Marowich, kind of lost Hollis for a while, and that was, I'm sure it was really weighing heavily on his mind the rest of the night until Hollis could, essentially they walked back into the engagement area. Hollis just said, hey, look, we're going to stay here and die, or we're going to fight our way out and link up with Alpha Company again, and they end up walking out. So, bottom line is fighting through a lot of different small engagements along the way. The convoy kind of accordion slinkied its way up to the engagement area. Task Force Ranger was already trying to extract those bodies of the pilots and crew members in those 2 helicopters.
You got up. Now, you got up to the first helicopter?
Right.
Okay.
First helicopter. Couldn't pull the body out. Bodies were stuck. We had no professional extrication equipment. Something that I really have beaten a drum on for the rest of my career, because I just, that lesson learned just resonates, to this day. Couldn't get the body out, essentially had to pull it apart. It was a collective effort of everybody who was on the ground. One of the things that we brought with us was plenty of water, plenty of ammunition, and plenty of medical supplies. Task Force Ranger medics and including the Delta medics essentially just scarfed all that stuff up to keep pumping fluids into people. But for the most part, it was changing bandages out and continue to stop bleeding. Water, gone. Water was it just got sucked up, or they were just out of water. Ammunition, gone. Essentially, we replenished most of their basic load. So ambulances, all Humvees, every vehicle had water, ammo, and a little bit of medical supplies on it, and off they went. Unless of course it got blown up. So we ended up, when the link up at the engagement area, a little bit tenuous. The bottom line was, the 10th Mountain Division guys, 214 we were fresher, and we essentially just needed to secure the area so we could continue the extrication of the wounded and dead, and continue to stabilize wounded, and go over our actual route out. Essentially make sure that our route out, the plan was solid. So, the rest is really pretty much already told through, there really isn't a whole lot else to tell you on this, except for one piece. This has always bothered me. The guys who ended up running out of Mogadishu because they got left in the convoy, it was really a matter of overeager Malaysian drivers and the fact that there wasn't any communication in those convoys. The guys who had to run out weren't just Task Force Ranger guys. They were 10th Mountain guys, Task Force, whoever it is that got left there. And it was a combination of 214 guys, and one guy gets shot in the arm badly on that run out.
One of the 214
Yeah,
troopers.
yeah. He was an Alpha company. He was the RTO for Captain Marwich. Big kid. I can't remember his name. But yeah, got shot in the arm, and then essentially ran out and ran all the way back to the Pakistani stadium. So. It was truly a shared mission. There's no doubt about it. It truly was, for a group of guys who were, we used to say in Ranger Regiment, you're a triple volunteer.
Right.
Well, for double volunteers, I guess, 10th Mountain guys, maybe even single volunteers, I don't know. Maybe guys that just thought they were going to end up in some other place and ended up at 10th Mountain Division. That was the right unit at the right time. For Task Force Ranger. Had another unit been there, I don't know if they'd have pulled it off. Maybe they would have, but that was an exceedingly good battalion, light infantry battalion, and very combat focused, very technically proficient, and had all the right leadership in place with the right mindset. In order to accomplish the mission. And here's another thing that everyone just needs to remember. 2 weeks later, all the Task Force Ranger was back. And then 214 was there watching all this stuff go on television. Here's one thing that the one visual that has burned in my brain at the end of the mission. Colonel David pulled me out the side, patted me on the back, said, "Hey, your medics were gods on the battlefield last night," and it was the proudest moment to this day of my military career. I walked back to my CP, and I looked over at the aid station, and there was one of my medics who had blood all over his uniform. Not his, other guys. And he was cleaning his weapon. And that guy was tired. And he'd been up the whole day before training, and then up the whole night doing that, which is the most exhausting thing I'd ever experienced. And there he was cleaning his weapon, breaking it down to the, right down to the very, cleaning the rounds and cleaning his magazine. And nobody told him to do that. I didn't tell him to do that. That was 214 right there. I mean, that's what you're supposed to do. That's what you're supposed to do. But boy, to see a guy actually do it when he was that tired, he had every excuse to just say, I'm going to blow that off for a couple of hours. It's the first thing he did before he put his head down. That to me is burned in my brain forever. And so.
That's great. I think we're going to have to close down.
Yeah.
That's a great ending point. So wish we had about 3 more hours to do this, and
Yeah.
a couple of cigars and a couple of beers. And,
Yeah.
We'll probably have a lot of fun here, but we have another interview coming in.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to drag
That was
on here.
fantastic. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
That was
you bet.
great.
Well,
All right. When are you going to come back up to Drum and visit us?
well, I make it back. I make it back to Syracuse.
Well, I got my card right here.
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
So.
Man, give me a shout.
Yeah.
I live right up off 342.
Yeah.
Got a big old monster stone house, and
Nice.
me and the wife come by. We'll throw some meat and see if we can burn some meat, and I can talk a little bit more, fire up a couple of cigars and whatever.
to.
Great, great. All right.
Going on.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And that's one of the things I'm going to be trying to be working on.